Fred Fulton knocked out in 18 seconds. That night, Jack Dempsey needed only a few seconds to remind the world that his brutality knew no limit. It was July 27, 1918, in Harrison, New Jersey, and inside the ring set up at the Federal League Baseball Park. It didn't even take 30 seconds of action before Fred Fulton collapsed. Fred Fulton was no unknown name. He was considered a legitimate heavyweight title contender. Tall and powerful, he had dominated most of his previous opponents. But that night, he didn't even get the chance to fight because Dempsey had something else in mind. In 18 seconds of active combat, he destroyed the career of a man who might have become world champion. That victory changed everything and turned his name into one that could no longer be ignored. Not by promoters, not by journalists, and certainly not by any fighter standing in his path. And the rest of his story would soon justify every ounce of fear his name inspired. The destruction of Jess Willard. It was on July 4, 1919, in Toledo, Ohio, that the legend of Jack Dempsey truly began to take shape. That day, thousands of spectators gathered to witness what was expected to be a routine defense from the reigning heavyweight world champion, Jess Willard, a colossus nearly 2 meters tall, known as the Potawatomi Giant, weighing in at close to 115 kilos. He seemed simply unbeatable, with a physique that inspired raw fear. But what happened that day would forever alter the course of boxing and shift it into a new era. Because standing across from him was a smaller, less imposing man, a challenger named Jack Dempsey, who despite his modest stature carried inside him a pure rage and a style built on relentless aggression, flurries of strikes, and a killing energy impossible to contain the moment the bell rang and the fight began. And when that first round bell sounded, no one could have predicted what followed. In just seconds, Dempsey charged at Willard with a rare intensity, overwhelming him with a storm of savage punches. By the end of that first nightmarish round, the reigning world champion was already on the canvas. Dazed and shattered, his jaw was broken, his ribs were fractured, his left eye was swollen shut, and several of his teeth had been knocked out. Yet this was only the beginning of the torment, as he would fall and rise several more times within that same round. The referee hesitated, unsure whether to stop the fight or let it continue as the crowd stood in stunned disbelief. Willard tried to get back up after every fall, but his body was no longer responding, and somehow he still made it to the third round. That's when his corner finally threw in the towel, ending the humiliation and crowning Jack Dempsey the new heavyweight world champion to the deafening roar of a crowd still struggling to grasp what it had just witnessed. This foundational bout became a defining moment in the history of boxing as it made Dempsey a global star. Willard himself would later say, "Dempsey is a tremendous puncher, and it was the first time I ever lost my footing. I've sent plenty of pigeons home in the same state he left me, and now I know exactly how they felt." Despite the magnitude of that night, controversy followed. Some claimed Dempsey had cheated by hiding plaster in his gloves to increase his destructive power, but those accusations were swiftly denied by officials and dismissed by the footage. The birth of the nickname Manassa Mer. It was July 1919, and the world had just witnessed a scene so brutal it felt like a vision from another age. Jess Willard, known as the Potawatomi Giant, collapsed repeatedly before a man much smaller than him, but infinitely hungrier. That man was Jack Dempsey, and that day in Toledo, he wrote his story by becoming world champion and earning a name that would leave a mark in history, the Manassa Mer. That nickname carried an entire legend within 3 words. Manassa was the name of his hometown in Colorado, where he had grown up with dust and hunger. Mahler came from the way he demolished his opponents without mercy, with a violence so methodical and relentless it bordered on the mechanical. And on that night of July 4th, 1919, he became that name all at once. In the very first round, he destroyed his opponent, sending him to the canvas 7 times before the bell. At that point, nothing like it had ever been seen before, especially not against a reigning world champion, and certainly not against a giant like Willard. By the end of the 3rd round, Willard's corner ended the beating, and Dempsey was champion of the world. From that day on, the name Manassa Mer was no longer a journalist's invention, but a truth and a war cry, because he had just proven that no matter the size of the man or the length of his resume, if he stood between Dempsey and the title, he would fall. That night, the world witnessed the birth of a legend, and Jack Dempsey, in just 9 minutes of fighting, carved his name into history like a brand seared into iron. The $1 million fight, Dempsey versus Carpentier. It was a burning summer, and America was about to witness an extraordinary event. On July 2, 1921, in the open-air arena of Boyle's 30 Acres in Jersey City, a boxing match would redefine forever the scale of sport as spectacle. Jack Dempsey, reigning heavyweight world champion, faced Georges Carpentier, a French fighter and the reigning light heavyweight champion, who was also a decorated war hero. The newspapers spoke of nothing else, and tickets were being traded for outrageous sums in anticipation of what would be called the fight of the century. Dempsey, already known as the Manassa Mer, was a living legend and a symbol of raw aggression and explosive power. Carpentier had his own nickname, the Orchid Man, and had knocked out battling Levinsky to become champion of the world. He embodied the courage of a noble soldier and had captivated the American public. That contrast only fed the frenzy as over 90,000 spectators crammed into the wooden arena built specially for the occasion, and for the first time in history, a boxing match generated more than $1 million in revenue. In fact, nearly $2 million filled the coffers, a number the sport had never reached before. But beneath the lights, there would be no romantic balance. Dempsey wasn't fighting for beauty or elegance because he had only one thing on his mind: to impose his law and destroy everything in his path like a bulldozer. He got to work right away in the early rounds, although in the second round he took a clean right hand from Carpentier. The Frenchman tried to charm his way inside with pivots and crisp hooks, hoping to steal speed from power, but it didn't work because Dempsey was a hurricane. In the fourth round, he crushed the resistance with one of his signature combinations, ending with a brutal right hook and knocking Carpentier out. The referee began the count, but it was pointless. Dempsey had just knocked down more than a man. He had landed a decisive blow in the history of sport. That fight marked a radical turning point. Dempsey was no longer just a champion. He became an American legend and a face printed on every poster. From that day on, boxing matches became money machines, headlined by a hard, brutal man from Manassa. War against Furo. On September 14, 1923, at the Polo Grounds in New York, in front of 90,000 roaring spectators, Jack Dempsey stepped into the ring to face Luis Angel Furo, an Argentine fighter nicknamed the Wild Bull of the Pampas. Furo was a massive, untamed man with a gaze that already spelled chaos, and that night no one was about to witness an ordinary boxing match. The already electric crowd would instead bear witness to a war and an unprecedented flood of violence. In the very first minute, Furo sent Dempsey to the canvas with a brutal right hand. The champion went down on one knee, but he got up and unleashed a powerful left hook that dropped his opponent. Dempsey kept punishing Furo with heavy punches and knocked him down 7 times. Against most fighters, that would have been enough, but the Wild Bull of the Pampas wasn't done yet. Barely a minute after getting up, the Argentine launched a counterattack and, with a series of powerful rights, sent his opponent flying out of the ring. He shattered Dempsey's jaw and hurled him into the reporters. At that moment, the world held its breath because it looked like a crushing triumph for Furo. But Dempsey climbed back into the ring and added another chapter to his growing legend. Before the bell could ring to end the first round, Dempsey dodged Furo's attacks and retaliated with 2 devastating rights. As soon as the second round began, the champion knocked his opponent down for the 8th time. Yet Furo rose once again and tried to land a right hand of his own to no avail. Instead, he took another right to the jaw that finally pinned him to the canvas for good. That fight became an instant legend and marked a turning point in boxing history. For the first time, a Latino fighter was seen as a legitimate contender for the heavyweight world title. But beyond the symbolism, the bout proved one clear truth. Dempsey was not just a puncher, he was a survivor. His 6 title defenses, Between 1919 and 1926, Jack Dempsey was not just a champion but a living institution, and each title defense became a national event, while the way he handled every challenger only added to his legend. His first title defense against Billy Misk in September 1920 was a strange and almost silent affair. Misk was terminally ill with kidney disease, but begged for one last fight, and Dempsey granted him this final round before death claimed him. In the third round, Miski collapsed. He would die a few months later. That night, even in victory, Dempsey's fists were weighed down by a silent sorrow. He then faced Bill Brennan later in 1920, a tough brawler from Chicago. The fight was longer and rougher than the previous one. Brennan hit hard, stayed upright, and even injured Dempsey's eye. But the Manassa Mauler was a combustion engine that turned every blow absorbed into more energy to strike back. In the 12th round, he floored Brennan with a knockout and remained unbeaten. After that, he faced Georges Carpentier in 1921 in Jersey City. This historic bout, remarkable both for how it unfolded and for the record-breaking revenue it generated, was above all a clash of symbols. Carpentier, the decorated war hero and emblem of good, versus Dempsey, the dark force who at the time was seen as the villain. For 3 rounds, Carpentier shone and even landed a shot to Dempsey's chin, but in the 4th round, the Frenchman cracked and collapsed. In 1923, he faced Tommy Gibbons in Shelby, Montana. The town gambled its entire economy on the fight, which turned out to be a financial disaster but a sporting success. Gibbons took blow after blow to the head without flinching and landed several body shots of his own. The bout lasted 15 rounds, and though Dempsey didn't dominate as usual, he logically won on points. Then, in September 1923, he retained his title in the legendary war against Furo, as already told. Finally, his last title defense came against Gene Tunney in 1926. Dempsey stepped into the ring after a 3-year absence, having not fought since Furo, and likely believed his legend alone would suffice. But Tunney was a disciplined boxer, whose speed and intelligence were his greatest weapons. Throughout the fight, he dodged Dempsey's blows and landed his own with surgical precision over 15 rounds. For the first time, the decision went against Dempsey, and he lost his title. The long count fight against Tunney. On September 22, 1927, in Chicago, Jack Dempsey returned for a high-stakes rematch with Gene Tunney, who had beaten him the year before, and this was his chance to reclaim the heavyweight world title. That night, in front of over 100,000 electrified spectators at Soldier Field, Dempsey didn't regain the crown, but he reminded the world he was still a living legend of the noble art. And in the 7th round, he did so with such brutality that it left a permanent mark on boxing history. That moment would be known as the long count. The fight began as a tense duel, with Tunney's footwork allowing him to avoid many of the former champion's punches while landing several of his own. Dempsey took the blows and remained under pressure, though he retaliated occasionally through the first 6 rounds. But in the 7th, he landed a right-left-right combination that dropped Tunney to the canvas. It was the first knockdown of Tunney's career, and the crowd erupted, seemingly on the brink of witnessing the return of the king. But the referee didn't start the count because Dempsey failed to move to a neutral corner as required by a new rule introduced after his own destructive reign. That rule stated that a fighter scoring a knockdown must immediately retreat to a neutral corner before the count begins. Dempsey ignored the instruction and stood motionless despite the referee's signals and shouts. When Dempsey finally complied and moved away, the referee began the count, but Tunney had already had time to breathe and regain awareness. By the time the official count began, Tunney had been down for over 13 seconds, 3 more than allowed by the rule, but still, the fight went on. At the end of 10 rounds, the judges awarded Tunney a unanimous decision. Dempsey left the ring without a belt, but with his legend firmly intact, because what he accomplished that night against such a skilled opponent was nothing short of extraordinary, and it certainly wasn't the long count controversy that would ever erase that. It was the last title fight of Dempsey's career. Retirement and legacy. When Jack Dempsey stepped out of the ring after his second loss to Gene Tunney in 1927, It wasn't just the end of a sports career, but the beginning of a transformation. The King of Chaos refused to fade quietly into obscurity, even though he had already accomplished so much. Dempsey endured the 1929 stock market crash and watched his fortune vanish, along with the comfort he had built for himself. But what he didn't lose was his rage, and that's what helped him rebuild, notably through the opening of a restaurant in his name in the heart of New York. There, the man with the thunderous hooks became a charismatic host, still respected as ever. Even outside the ring, war would catch up with him. During World War II, he enlisted in the U.S. Coast Guard, displaying a humility that impressed even those who had never seen him fight, and in doing so, he earned a lasting place in America's heart. That step transformed him from a boxing legend into a true national icon. Yet what truly spans generations is his legacy inside the ring, a style defined by raw power and controlled fury, which continues to influence trainers and fighters who dream of dominating the sport the way he did. And what is perhaps most remarkable is that even those who beat him, like Tunney, acknowledge that he embodied something greater than victory or defeat. Muhammad Ali himself, a symbol of a new era, once said he admired Dempsey's savagery, his ability to electrify a crowd, and the fear he could inspire before even throwing the first punch. To this day, in gyms around the world, the Jack Dempsey method is still taught.